Hey, it's Tiffany. If you've been listening to the show for a while, you know I'm feeling this pull away from social media and towards real connection. And that's exactly why I started my newsletter. It's a place for us to connect authentically without having to jump through algorithms. I usually share a little bit about what's going on in my life, my family, practical tips for 2 career homes, and just generally things that are inspiring me. I'd love for you to join me so we can create this little online space and we can lean into all of the ands in our lives together. You can sign up at the link in our show notes. Enjoy this episode. I'm a small town kid born with a big city spirit. I choose to play a lot of awesome roles in life: mom, wife, entrepreneur, CEO, board member, investor, and mentor. 17 years ago, I founded a marketing consultancy, and ever since, my husband JR and I have been building our careers and our family on the exact same timeline. Yep, that means 4 kids, 3 businesses, 2 careers, all building towards one life we love. When I discovered that I could purposefully embrace all of these ands in my life, it unlocked my world. And I want that for you too. I'm Tiffany Souter, and this is Scared Confident. In this episode, I have a conversation with Peter Dunn, also known as Pete the Planner. He spent the better part of the first 20 years of his career becoming a personal finance expert, helping people of all ages, like 20 to 60, figure out how do you build for retirement? How do you have sound financial health? And I brought him on initially because as I think about fear, I know money is a place where a lot of people have fear. And I wanted to hear from him. You know, he's talked to thousands of people. What are the common fears that are often emerging when people think about money? We did talk about that, but a real surprise aspect of the conversation was he spent a long time creating content, being this media personality, having syndicated columns, writing books, doing all this stuff. And in the last 5 years, he's pivoted that knowledge that he was using in like a one-to-one environment to begin building a technology company that's scaling what he knows, called Your Money Line. And we really dove into his fears and where he's at in his life as he's taken this big risk at a time in his career when oftentimes we're beginning to kind of like capitalize on the work that we've done. He's, in a sense, starting over. And so if you're at that place in your life, I think this is an excellent conversation to remind us to have the courage to follow our hearts, to follow our intuition, to follow the newer maybe version of ourselves. And Peter jumped off the deep end, and I think it's pretty cool. And he was really vulnerable in sharing that with us. So listen in. So if I were to say what Your Money Line is, I would say it is a way of scaling what Pete the Planner perfected. Now you can scale it so it's more one-to-many instead of so one-to-one. Is that right?
Not only was that our intent, and it's nice to hear that we're somewhat delivering on that, right? As our product team says, sometimes they've got to get the algorithm out of my head, you know?
Right.
And so that's been nice.
They're decoding your intuition, your experience.
Yeah. Part of the journey was doing over 28,000 one-on-one consultations with people as the early nature of Your Money Line, which was sit in a conference room at a big company. People came in over 20 minutes. It was sort of financial speed dating. And you just start to see patterns that are just fascinating to the point where, believe it or not, you can have an amazing financial conversation in 20 minutes. And I would argue it's better than a 1-hour conversation. So we've tried to scale the perfect 20-minute conversation.
What is the argument for how a 20-minute conversation is better than a 60-minute conversation?
Bandwidth and energy around something so stressful.
Okay.
Right. So,
for the other person in the conversation.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you sit down with someone for 20 minutes, they're so stressed about the topic. And if you were to leave them after a 1-hour conversation, naturally you're going to have a list of 15, 30 things they need to go do, which is a horrible way to get someone to take action. And so it became, go do this, come back to me when you're done. And they'd come back and be like, awesome. Now go do this. And they'd come back. Awesome. At this point, they're starting to build confidence. They're starting to build self-control. At some point, sacrifice crosses over into self-control. You do something hard and you're like, well, that was hard. Then you got to convince yourself to do it again. And then at some point it becomes, well, that's just who I am. That's the sort of person I am. I eat a salad with grilled chicken at an airport and not a burger and fries. That's just who I am. But the first couple times you make that decision is not who you are. It's who you're trying to be.
So I want to take 2 branches off of that. You talked about Your Money Line as a culmination of putting together the insights from these 28,000 conversations, when did your money line become in the vision for you? Like, did you have the foresight the whole way? When did that start becoming part of what you saw?
I think it's when I became more interested in developing other people's careers than my own. As a personal finance expert, which is so made up.
Well, it's weirder when you say it about yourself, but I'll
Yeah.
say it as a
Yeah.
personal finance
Yeah,
expert.
thank you so much. As a media personality, how about that, right? Like there was Dave Ramsey and Susie Orman, who I have respect for, and I was on this path to maybe join them.
Mhm.
And I made a long way down that path, and then it became so unimportant to me, just
Mm.
somehow overnight. I was like, well, this is silly. Here's a person born on third base, me, and I'm gonna just turn it into more me. Like that can't be it. And so that's when your money line really came into focus of like, okay, let's stop making this about me. And that's also why the Pete the Planner thing has become just so I'm thankful for it. I'm grateful
Mhm.
for it. I'm just so interested in it. I'd rather set off a talent bomb of
Mhm.
really empathetic leaders than um, talk more about me.
Who noticed that change in you? Did you notice it first, or did you see people around you projecting that to you, or where did your energy go where you started to realize, like, I don't know, this doesn't feel the same?
I definitely noticed it in myself, but I think it was a natural progression. At some
Mhm.
point, if you just keep going, hey, let's make this about me, there's arguably something wrong with you.
Mhm.
I think it's a maturation process. I think just admitting privilege and on some level. You grow up upper middle class, you never want for anything, and then you raise your hands in glory of whatever success you have and
Mhm.
without acknowledging the path. So that was a part of it too. And maybe as a parent, I have a now 14-year-old and soon to be an 11-year-old. And so just trying to instill values within them and forcing yourself to self-reflect is like, what's really going on here?
There's an enormous amount of fear, a lot of fear around personal finances and just money in general. And so I want you to speak to that. But before you do, because I've noticed, I think a lot of it comes from people's childhoods. I grew up in a very entrepreneurial home. So we talked about money all the time.
Mm.
And it was part of, I think, my dad redeeming some of his own childhood and where he started and not knowing as much as he wanted to. And so he was very intentional about financial literacy with us, which felt normal at the time because it's the only house I grew up in. But now look at that and say, man, that was a really atypical experience. What was your childhood experience with money and personal finances? I'd love to know that. And then I want to jump into kind of where the fears are at, what you see and what patterns you see across that.
I wasn't forced to get a job, but I was encouraged to get a job as a kid. And so early elementary, I can't even really think back to like what was my financial experience, but I always think it through the lens of an adolescent. Like what's the expectations that your parents put on you? And so the expectation was that you would work. And so the value of work and the interest in work, I think drove my financial interests. There's a interest joke there, I'm sure, as it relates to
Yes.
money, but I'm
Uh-huh.
not making it. And so I think that was the relationship with money and my parents and I was that like you work, you get to earn your money, and guess what? You get to do whatever you want with it. And frankly, I think that's beautiful.
Mhm.
I mean, that's something my formerly 13-year-old daughter, now 14, is fresh, as you can tell. It's the second reference to it. It's a week old. Uh, she's soccer ref, making $160 a weekend as a 13-year-old. And I think that's the best way to teach her about money.
Mhm.
So that was it. My parents definitely have influenced my career. They made a beautiful life for my sister and I. And again, they paid for our college. I live in the student loan world where I talk to people about their
Mhm.
student loans and I have to check my privilege at the door. I have to say, yeah, by the way, my parents paid for a
Mhm.
private school education. So I'm just going to give you my perspective. And I hope you're okay with that. Right.
Mhm.
Um, which to backtrack a hair, Tiffany, goes back to this like personal finance expert thing. I don't want to shout down the mountain at people as though, hey, I've figured all of this out and why don't you climb up here with me? I've always viewed it as I'm going to come down the mountain of the comfort and stability I've built for myself and see if I can walk up next to people. That's more how I view it. That's not to necessarily suggest that other people in my space shout down the mountain. Although, if you'd like to draw that conclusion, feel free.
We do open book financials at Element 3, which is not personal finance, it's business finance.
Sure.
But I find as a starting point, one of the things that are the most intimidating is just the vocabulary. I have a finance degree, and so I was educated in the words, and then I'm a business owner, so I know the words. And then I grew up in a very financially illiterate home. And what I mean by that is we talked about filing taxes and a 1040 EZ, and like the words weren't a thing I was trying to decode as an adult. I had familiarity with them. So how do you break down even the fear of the vocabulary? Having the humility to say, I don't know what that word means, or I've never heard of that form, or I didn't know about that thing, I think can be a real stumbling block.
If you think about the idea that you have a relationship with money from when you start working and probably before that, and there's this belief that we somehow get better with it because we have an elongated relationship with it, right? It's like the idea of like, oh, well, I'm good with food because I've been eating for 45 years. Like, that's sort of ridiculous, right? And so when I think about people's stress and money troubles, I have financial stress just like anybody else, but I don't have trouble with money. So I go to different areas of my life where I have behavioral challenges that maybe hit me a little different. Like I don't always make the best nutrition choices and other people do. And they might look at my nutrition choices and be like, well, what are you doing? It's so obvious. Well, it's unfortunately not that easy for me. Or some people maybe are amazing in their faith or in relationships or their mental health, great habits and hygiene there. So as we try to deliver personal finance advice and hear people, we just offer that idea. You offer the idea of like, okay, great. Maybe you're great at money, but you're terrible at this. Or maybe you're terrible at money, but you're great at this. And I think that empathetic approach just takes the terminology out of it.
Yeah, that's a great point.
People love to say things like, well, I'm not good with money. But that's not really a thing. It's a point in their life of which the desires for themselves and their behavior are not aligned. I think financially, the second you tell yourself you're not good with money, you put all this undue pressure on yourself and you're the only one putting it on yourself. And it's just not fair to what you really want for yourself.
What do you find people are really saying when they say, I'm not good with money? What's behind, I'm a spender?
I think people disassociate with the responsibility they have in getting the results they want, right? They sort of abstain from their culpability. They're like, well, hey, I'm bad. What are you going to do? I'm bad. And it's like, it doesn't really work that way. And again, that's where I go right back to nutrition and health of like, yeah, I have things I love to eat, but I want to see my grandchildren someday.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got to change that. I love to do behavioral experiments on myself, and that sounds incredibly clinical, but it's not. I like to do really difficult things just to see what I'm capable of. So we did dry January in our house, like many houses do. And I love data. And my Whoop strap told me that my resting heart rate was 20% lower not consuming alcohol. And I also noticed my mood was different. And so, without putting too much pressure on myself, I was like, I'm not going to drink this year. And coming off of COVID, I had more than my share. And I don't feel like I had an unhealthy relationship with alcohol. But at the same time, I'm like, yeah, let's just do it. I used to do 28 push-ups a day for several years, which is 10,000 a year. I love pushing the limits because then when times aren't artificially hard, when they're really hard, you can tap that sort of exercise you put yourself through and you'd be like, well, I did that. I can do this. And that's been helpful for me.
I think in my own life, when I've gone into seasons where I'm spending maybe differently than I otherwise would, it's sometimes a reaction to something totally different going on in my life, insecurity, whatever it is. So when you're, doing personal financial advising and people are saying, I'm here to talk about my finances, I'm not here to talk about these other things that my spending is coping with. How does that conversation sound? How do you get to a place where people are willing to be honest with themselves about some of those relationships that they may not see initially?
It's trial and error. At first, it wasn't as easy as it is now. I remember early when I was a financial advisor, I sort of dove down that path once, Tiffany, with someone that I sort of sensed something. And I remember something saying to the effect of like, who do you think you are to ask me that? Or why would I tell you that? And this is early days of Pete the Planner. And I was like, well, I'm an expert at that. It was so awkward. It was like a middle school dance. It was so weird. But now I have more confidence in my team. Good Lord, the talented people on my advice team now, they're just so comfortable hearing people. If someone comes to us with something difficult, Tiffany, we can say, that sounds like you're going through a lot. Man, I would feel the exact same way if I was going through that. And while that's not manipulative language, it's validating to hear that a person isn't just off their rocker, that, yeah, anybody would feel like that. And that goes a really long way. The first thing you say when someone shares something difficult financially, the very first words impact the rest of the conversation. And the financial world's not the best at empathy. They'll be like, shouldn't have gone into credit card debt. You shouldn't have so much Starbucks. And we just think that's gross. Like, we just think that's just the silliest, most reductive thing. And, I get it. Maybe that Starbucks was the best part of your week. I've been there.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we do it.
So I give you a chance to pitch the product a little bit. What is the ideal engagement with your money line? You guys have designed the product to be engaged. How?
Well, it's two elements, right? There's our coaches, which employees through their employers can call our coaches. It's confidential, doesn't cost anything because the employer picks up the tab. It's an employee benefit. And it's just an opportunity to ask anything about your financial life. And you won't be sold anything. And our people are experts. You think about your financial life for a second. If you've never talked to a financial person, the only financial life you've ever seen is your own. And so as you go to make good judgments about it, you don't have really the perspective of, oh, this is how this usually works, because you're just in it. And it's so visceral and it's so hard and it's so intense. Our people can say, oh, actually, I've seen this hundreds of times. And then they can poke around a little bit and then they can get people to the right solution. If you think about the spectrum of your financial life in terms of complexity, so I'm going to take you back a little bit here to your first checking account. That's the first end of complexity. That's like 1 on the scale. And 10 is you're investing in private equity and you're doing estate planning. So that's the spectrum of a person's financial life. Most people need help with 1 through 7. Financial planners do 8 through 10. So there's this huge gap of people need problem solving, and your money line does 1 through 7. So that's one element of what we do. And then our software that helps facilitate this process. Our software is going to get to a pretty interesting place, and I'm really excited about it. I mean, we're putting a lot into it, and we're going to ingest a person's entire financial life into the software. It sounds really scary, but it ingests their data so we can be predictive about what's going to happen. I think so many people give up and say, I'm not good about money because things feel unknown, but everything's there. Like, if I can say in April of 23, if I can look at a person based on their ingested data and say, I want you to know, Gary, assuming the person's name's Gary, because otherwise that's a weird way to address someone. In February of 24, you're going to have a cash flow crunch. And if you click here right now, we're going to fix it now. Like, that's where we're going. Like, and that excites me because I think it's an approachable way to help people with what terrifies them.
You think about people are afraid to go on vacation because it's going to cost too much money. It's like, this is the amount that your normal spending would allow you to spend on a vacation. Would it go to those kinds of things as well?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about a couple sort of examples of that, if you ever have daycare costs and you think about those daycare costs sort of hold your paycheck hostage for at least 6 years, right? And as soon as those start to go away, the world of possibility opens up to you. But the reality is, that's going to happen. Why not accept that, acknowledge it, and make it part of your plan? Another version of that is you look at the impact that spending on travel sports has on college preparation. You say, okay, going to my kids' soccer game is my favorite thing in the world, even if I've got to drive 2 states over to watch him play against other 10-year-olds. And you're like, well, that doesn't make sense. It might make sense through the lens of, oh, but we're also saving for college. Some families do that and they say, the actual impact of this decision is going to be this child is going to have $800 a month student loan payments 14 years from now. And some people don't want to know that. But I think if you approach it the right way and you say, hey, it's a safe space, just trade off, and here's the actual math. People love to live in the fact, I don't know the math.
Yeah.
No, but the math's there. I know the math, and here it is. And that's not meant to make you feel bad. It's to inform you. I love information. I want as much information as I can because it leads to better decision making. Sometimes I don't like to step on the scale because I don't want to know the number.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to know.
That's an amazing analogy for this.
Yeah. And so, like, I'm in a weird place right now mentally. I don't know if it's good or bad. I'm currently, again, taking control of some of my nutrition and fitness decisions. Tiffany, I've yet to step on the bathroom scale, despite the fact that I'm doing it. And I know that's the very first thing I should have done. Like, even after this conversation, I'm working from home the rest of the afternoon. I've already thought twice today of like, I guess I do need to step on the scale today. And it's wild. And that's why I'm comfortable talking about people's personal finances through that lens because I've got my own challenge with something like that.
But I've also learned, and this has helped me a lot, of disassociating my behaviors from an immediate outcome. Meaning, whatever you're choosing to do, even though you haven't stepped on the scale, if they're moving you closer towards a healthy life, the scale is simply a byproduct of it. For me, that helped me accept habits more as like I'm ingesting this as part of, like you said, this is part of my identity. This is just who I am. I don't know if lifting weights will add 5 pounds to the scale or if it will take them off, but I know it's important for bone density, for my flexibility, for vitality. If you're going to have a baby at 40, you got to live to be 102. That's my goal. And so that's the thing I'm accepting. I don't know what it will do to the scale, but that's irrelevant to the choice I'm making. I'm sure there's parallels to that in the financial world too.
There has to be. I
Mhm.
think it's about intentionality and
Mhm.
honesty and accountability. All I really want in my life right now with my relationships is accountability. And I don't know
Mhm.
if I've always been there, but that's all I want now. I mean, if I'm not doing something right as a husband or as a dad, I'd like a safe space to talk
Mhm.
about it.
Mhm.
And I'm okay with hearing that's like, you know what, this isn't going well. One of my favorite books ever is Crucial Conversations. And it's because the content of the deficiency, if you address it at that stage, then it never gets to the part where it's a pattern or damages the relationship. And I'm sort of hungry for that level of accountability right now.
So I want to know how it felt. Again, outsider looking in, this Pete the Planner persona that you had created, the trajectory of where that was headed. You had, columns that were syndicated. You had show all this kind of stuff. It was like kind of happening.
Hmm.
And then for whatever reason, it sounds like, hey, internally, I just changed what I needed. Kind of started over. You went like back to startup. I think there's venture capital money involved in
Yeah.
this thing, which means you're not totally your own boss. You don't control the wand totally. Now you have people, now you've got expectations, kind of going back to a place that you hadn't been at in a really long time. How did that feel? What was that journey like for you? Did fear speak to you in that?
Yeah. Very informed question, Tiffany.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's my entire life right now.
I was good at that. Can I be good at this too?
Yes.
Mhm.
The last year has been the hardest year of my professional life, but it is easily the most fulfilling. I mean, so it's almost cliche. I feel like I should write bad cards. It's been so hard.
What's hard? Can you share?
Sure. With respect to all my coworkers who I've ever had, I was calling the shots from a functional responsibility standpoint in my organization for over 20 years. And now I've hired an incredibly talented group of partners, executive leaders who are amazing, and opening them up to the mistakes I've made and sharing in the responsibility has been so fulfilling. And I love it. But yet, as being the only person who made decisions for over 2 decades, it's not a matter of giving up control. That's not it. It's to some degree the shame of wasted opportunity, and I extend myself some grace, but that's the truth. And then the stakes are a lot higher. I've never had a boss, and the board of directors isn't my boss, but I've chosen to view that relationship somewhere on that spectrum. Um, and as a former investment advisor who used to manage $100 million, the idea that now people have given me their money as an investment in the decisions I make, that has had an incredible impact on me. I take it so seriously.
Mhm.
The weird juxtaposition of the change today is an amazing example, oddly enough. This morning, woke up, went to my office early, and did a cable news interview as Pete the Planner, while one of my board members sat in my office next to my studio, and I went in and then talked about the direction of our company. And it was so strange that Tiffany, had this happened 5 years ago, I'm tweeting about the broadcast. I'm telling my wife about it. I'm texting my buddy. I don't care. It was just a task of the morning. Like I'm
Mhm.
stopping to get an overpriced coffee. But the strange thing is, people still view me as Pete the Planner. I'll be out to eat. People are like, Pete the Planner. And I'm like, okay, neat. It gave me a lot of opportunity. It was the culmination of a lot of people's belief and hard work.
Well, I think it made the practice of being a planner visible
Mm.
such that the underlying construct of what you're building, I think it gives it a perception of credibility because of that.
I was telling my team at the beginning of the first quarter, I just want to be the best CEO I can be. And I read so much to try to arm my brain with those sorts of things I want to get good at something new.
What did you most learn about yourself in the last year that surprised you?
That I could have difficult conversations with people in a respectful way. That, yeah, there's emotion involved, but there's kindness in honesty. But again, that goes back to my wife's observation that I tend to take responsibility for anything that goes wrong in any tangential area of my life. I will take 100% responsibility for it because then I feel empowered to fix it. I love to just blame myself because then I'll fix it.
Mhm.
If I say, oh, well, it's partially responsible, that I don't actually feel that
Compelled.
compelled. Yeah. So those tough conversations with people, previously, I was just viewing them as my personal failure that I didn't really want to share with them. And so I had to take that view of accepting, well, this isn't working. Well, that's on me for me to solve. But then I had to realize I'm actually shorting them by not letting them be responsible for that part of the moment. So I think that's been an evolution still in the works for me.
I hear you saying I want to be really good at the CEO thing. Like I
Mm.
really, really want to do that. And I'm reading all these books and ingesting all this information. I would also encourage you not to forget that part of your intuition is also as important about who you are and
Yeah.
to not override it so intellectually that you don't just lose your gut. And I think that's the ultimate leadership dance. And I'm not saying I'm there. I'm a highly intuitive leader. And so there's times I lean too hard on that. And I do need to understand the academic underlying framework and structure that drive something. And there's times where I've barreled into things so intellectually that I've intellectually spoken away what my gut was just saying. And I didn't know how to explain it, but I just knew. So I would just encourage you in that journey of finding that balance. I think that's the ultimate evolution, like the nirvana as a leader to know when and how to go between the two sides of those.
I appreciate that. We did disc profiles again here recently, and I'm a highest I, high D. In S and C don't exist in me,
Mhm.
right? Like I think the numbers, if you associate, I'm 611. And part of what I've learned through that is that it said I can tend to take my influence to a manipulative place. You want to talk about something to read about yourself,
Mhm.
and I reflected back on that to your point, and I thought, actually, the Pete the Planner brand was manipulation. It was manipulating people to do things they should do that they don't want to do, and I did it for them, and I did it I wasn't trying to sell them stuff. Like I legitimately feel good about that. But now I still have Pete the Planner's brain. And so when I think about how I'm able to influence people and potentially say things that can lead to a direction I want to go, it is in fact on the spectrum of manipulative. And so checking myself there, that's why I've been trying to pour in all this information because I don't want to just have sizzle. I want to make sure I have the substance to back up the carny mascot nature that is Pete the Planner.
Interesting.
One of my dearest colleagues, she and I talk about this a lot. She's one of the most substantive people I've ever worked with. We talk about sizzle and substance a lot. And as we're working on just discussions, working as colleagues, what I've really realized is that as much as I want to, you punch up a joke here, like I need to learn how to be more substantive.
Mm.
I think I'm substantive, and I think to do what I've done, I've had to have been, but I want to be more so that I don't rely as much on the razzle dazzle. She's definitely taught me that.
Mhm, that's cool. How with such low SC did you actually execute and produce so
I
much
don't know.
stuff? I mean, that had to take an enormous amount of energy. I am also high DI, no SC, and, getting a high amount of content produced without SCs around me is almost impossible. That's fascinating.
Yeah, the disc profile does not account for the chip on my shoulder around my work
Yeah,
ethic.
yeah, that created a burner for you.
Totally. Maybe an interesting story I can share with you. In July of 2015, I was driving back from Louisville back to Indianapolis, and my phone rang. It was a book publisher, and they said, "Hey, we know some people you know. Would you want to write a book? Do you have any book ideas?" And I gave him an idea that I'd really been stewing on, called The Commissioner, which is a book for people who have a commission or variable income. I still to this day think the hardest thing to do is to manage your money when you don't know what's coming in. And they're like, that's neat. But here's what we're thinking. What about someone like the decade of their life, like their 30s? I was like, yeah, that'd be interesting. And I was like, you really could do 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Like, we love that idea. Would you do that? And I'm like, sure. And they said, well, here's the problem. We want these to be in bookstores in January. So it's July. We would need all 6 manuscripts, and we'll even do commissioner by November 2nd. And I was like,
What?
okay. So I wrote 6 250-page books in 4 months.
No.
Yeah, no, I did. And I don't know how I did it other than I woke up at 4 every day and wrote till 10 a.m., 7 days a week. And that's one of those elements where I forced the delivery,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
It was great. It was good, but I'm a reformed underachiever, and so that sort of set me straight for a while.
That's actually a very rad example. I love that. I talk about living a life of and when you've decided you're going to do it, you'll figure out how. You had determined I'm going to do this, and you had committed to somebody external, and so you just figured out how to do it, and the people around you coalesced and figured out how to support that. That's amazing.
Yeah, I'm proud of it, but for me, other than an interesting story at a cocktail party of which I won't be having a drink this year, I think it's more an example of you can do anything. You
Uh-huh.
actually can do
Totally. You
anything,
can.
and that's what I use it for,
Uh-huh.
and for myself.
You can literally do anything. You just have to decide you're going to.
Yeah, I love to communicate. I love to write. Used to hate to write. Now I love it. I still write my columns, and I feel a real connection with my
Mhm.
readership. And for me, also as a radio person, I want my writing to read like I speak. I want people to read it and hear me on the radio, or hear me on the radio and hear my writing. And I feel like that is a skill I do have, that I have the ability to my writing and my speaking match. For a lot of aspiring speakers, I always tell them that they should record themselves and then have, use AI to transcribe it and then read it and say to themselves, is this readable? Like,
Mhm.
would I want to read this? And for me, if you actually do that, it's the same thing.
Okay, so the last place I want to dive in is kind of not dissecting the Pete the Planner brand,
Mhm.
but this idea of it takes a level of self-awareness, it takes a level of confidence, of like moxie to say, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to brand myself, Pete the Planner. This is what I'm going to be about. Take me back to what was that journey like? Um, and how intentional or iterative was it? Because building personal brands is a very, sort of en vogue thing right now. And it was like your young self. It wasn't
Yeah.
your 40, you're 45 now?
Yeah, I was 28-ish when it
Yeah,
all sort of
kind like
started.
pretty audacious if you write it out and say, here's a
Yeah.
28-year-old financial planner who's maybe had 5 years of experience, is going to work to brand themselves as a personal finance expert. Tell me about that.
It was the byproduct of my comedy career, which was parallel to
Oh,
the
that's
beginning part of my
right.
career. So
That's right.
I was doing a lot of comedy in Indianapolis and did in college, and was having some success, and he got some notoriety even within media here locally in around 2004. And it upset me because I was working my tail off to build my financial practice, and I was spending an hour on the weekends doing comedy, or 2 hours, whatever. And I was getting all this notoriety here, and then in my personal finance, whatever I was doing, I had financial success, but I had no notoriety. And I was like, all right, so I quit comedy. Just quit after some pretty nice recognition. I said, what if I just slap these two things together? And that's actually the birth of the Pete the Planner thing, was that. And so it wasn't I know a bunch of stuff. It's that I want to entertain and engage. And it's such an astute question about the audacity of someone at 28 saying, I know all this about money. I tried to make sure that I was only talking about things that I really did know. Of course, I got out ahead of my skis on a few things. But sort of the great learning now at 45 is, man, I know so little, right? And at 28, I'm like, I know so much. And at 45, I'm like, I don't know much at all. And so people who followed the brand for a long time, they've sort of got to see that. Big comments about parenthood when I have a 6-month-old, and big
Mhm.
comments about travel sports when I don't have kids. And so I've actually sort of enjoyed learning how much I've been wrong in the last decade or so.
Were there moments where you really stuck your foot in your mouth, or like those will be experiences that stay with me and I'm forever. I'll give you an example in my world. This just to kind of spur your thoughts. Is I had some people be on the podcast. I didn't necessarily do the interviews, but the shows showed up on my feed, right?
Okay.
And so it looks like I was part of the conversation. And it was not in keeping with my own sort of beliefs and perspectives. And I didn't listen to them before they went live. I'll remember that forever. It looked like an endorsement because my face is on the podcast cover. And I will never have something go live on the pod that I don't listen to if I
Yeah.
wasn't in the room or didn't conduct the interview. It's just learning. It seems obvious looking back, but I hadn't stubbed my toe enough to know like this is a mandate now. So anything like that where you're like, as you were finding your message, building it, that you're just like, these are lessons that I learned.
I did sort of suss out on the journey that the way you keep building your brand is to get down the hot take path.
Mm.
I sort of figured that out, and I made the decision I didn't want to go down the hot take path. So that may have been the thing that transitioned me out of Pete the Planner or not. But even if you think about people out in the zeitgeist now, it's how far are you willing to go with hot takes to make your star rise? And I just made that choice pretty early, actually, in the
So
process.
what's an example of a financial hot take that, like just for the lay of us?
Yeah, so it's attributing a personal finance decision to a character belief, right? You're an idiot if you have credit card debt.
Yeah. Okay.
Or you would be stupid to invest in this or that. Or here's a great one. Renting is throwing your money away. What an idiot. Like, what you're doing is you're taking a decision and you're making a character judgment about someone. And to me, like, that's just gross. So I didn't do that. But I will note, I had some missteps. In my first book I wrote in 2015, I said something to the effect of, if you don't trust your spouse with money, you don't trust your spouse. And I felt really good about it because I had been married for 5 years. And so I knew a lot about marriage, Tiffany. And I was like, yeah, that's awesome. And then I've sort of just grown up. I'm like, really? Like, my wife doesn't trust me to load the dishwasher, but she does trust me. Right. So like we just have different skills and acumen. So it's stuff like that. I mean, it's pretty minor
Yeah.
stuff.
Right.
I will say there is a fear that someday someone will find some video or audio that I've said something that just doesn't make sense. But I don't live in the fear of, old photos coming back to harm me or anything
Yeah,
crazy
right.
like
Uh-huh.
that. Thank God. I'm
So
pretty boring, actually. The reality is I'm boring.
yeah, no, that's great. So my oldest is 14 as well. So is
Mhm.
she going to high school next year?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a big
Yes.
deal. It feels like a big parenting moment to say we're figuring out high school classes and
It is. It is. That's been an interesting year, right? In a positive way. As I like to say, I have never been a 13-year-old girl. So I've learned a lot this year about what it is and the challenges of being a 13-year-old girl. And I think my young lady's done a great job. It's hard. Being a 13-year-old boy, it seems a lot easier. Seems a lot easier. That I was. And
that's
to
funny.
some degree still am.
That's funny. So are the things you like as you look at the next 4 to 5 years, I just feel like it's a very intentional
Sure.
window as I think about it as a mom of a 14-year-old daughter. What are the things you're being intentional about in kind of this, I'll say, near long-term stretch, both professionally and personally?
We have a similar brain, my daughter and I. So I will say with her, it's to how to use it the right way and how to advocate for yourself. So business wise, the next 4 or 5 years, we got some pretty interesting opportunities. We never necessarily set out in this stage of our business to do a lot of enterprise business, but it's coming in faster than we thought it would.
Mm-hmm.
And so that can change things.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, I'm still committed to setting off a talent bomb in central Indiana someday. Like that is very important to me. The strange part about me, although I'm in the financial business, I view money as a metric, not a personal success metric. And so I don't think a lot about my own personal finances in terms of the wealth that could be there. But the numbers associated with that may prove that we've made some right decisions along the way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a weird thing to get your head around. I guess being Pete the Planner, I've learned to not, need that much money to live as we try to fund our goals. I make a nice living, right? I do, but it's nothing absurd. I promise you that. And my goal has always been to like fund retirement in a natural way and fund my kids' college education in a natural way. And I don't need some outlandish event to fund all of that. And I still feel that way. I just want to keep getting intentional. I want to keep finding accountability, healthy accountability. That's where my brain's at right now.
One of the things that I'm passionate about is kind of looking back and saying like, dear 24-year-old self,
Mm.
this is the advice that
Yeah.
I would give you today. So if there's somebody younger who's listening to this and they're in this very high achiever mode and have all these things they want to do in life, what advice do you have for them?
I like the idea of advocating for yourself. I talk to our young people at the office a lot about that. There's nothing to say you don't deserve to be in any room you're in. And it's for the person that chooses to say, I belong here. That's it. That's the threshold. It's the person that said, yeah, I belong here.
Mhm.
And advocating for that. And if you work in a safe space where people are transparent and they're honest and they give good feedback, if you ever find yourself disagreeing with what's going on, it's on you to say something.
Mhm.
Like, so that's the sort of organization we're wanting to build. And I would encourage young people to try to find that environment. I don't know if this is helpful or not, but this is something I've always hung my hat on. Our capacity for work, our capacity to take on more is fascinating as it grows. Things that 15 years ago I would do in a day, I would talk about for 3 months. I will do 80 times a week now, and I don't care. And that's not to say push yourself harder. I just think it's fascinating. I think it's fascinating the amount of things I can juggle now that it would have been the most amazing thing in my life at 30, you know? I think it's cool.
So is advocating for yourself something that comes natural to you or you've had to learn that? Because that's an acute thing right now in your world, as you talked about your daughter and
Mhm.
just right now the advice you'd give.
Sort of came naturally to me. I've always believed I belong in any room I'm in, and just coming to learn that people don't feel that way. Sorry, getting choked up. Look at me. I'm a human. That's hard. Like that's hard for me right now. Of
Mhm.
like, stop.
That people don't feel safe in that way. Yeah. Yeah.
Look at you.
I actually feel like I did a good job. So Rachel Downey is
Yeah. Hi,
do
Rachel.
you know Rachel?
Yeah, I feel like
Yeah.
we've met.
Have you? Yeah. Anyway, I bawl every time I'm with her for some
Yeah.
reason. There's something about the way she asks me questions or
Yeah.
like listens so intently. I'm like, I don't cry. I don't
I'm a
cry
very
like this.
emotional
Are
person.
you? Yeah.
I can talk about business all day long and not get choked up. If I start
Mhm.
talking about my personal life, although it's my personal life's fine, I do it every time. I'm the worst wedding toast person ever. Like, I'm an amazing speaker. You get me to wedding toast, it's gonna be the worst toast you've ever heard.
Is long
Yeah.
pauses and awkward
Oh, it's
nose
so
blows.
awkward. I don't know. I feel so privileged that every teacher I ever had was like, "You'll be great. You'll be great."
Uh-huh.
And there's all these people that never hear that.
Yeah.
That's wild to me.
Uh-huh. As you have perfected your ability to be a storyteller and a speaker, what has been some of the most helpful things that you've done to help yourself get better at those things?
We do a thing at our office called Stand and Deliver, where every Wednesday stand up meeting, we have a different team member deliver 2 to 5 minutes on what they're doing now. But it's really so they can come with me for 15 minutes prior to that,
Mhm.
and I can make them a better presenter. I can just share some things that I've learned. And so,
So they prep for that with you?
yeah, they prep for
Amazing.
techniques that they'll use to whatever they're going to say.
Yeah.
And so I can share some of those things that I love for
Yes, it'd be
people.
amazing.
Number one, never be the hero of your own story. And I know I'm saying that after talking about myself for several minutes here, so hopefully it didn't come off that way. But I think if you're trying to present in any professional capacity, even as a salesperson, you want the listener to be the hero. You know, you
Mhm.
don't want to like the only way this gets solved is
Mhm.
that I'm in the room. And like I dislike that. I find it insincere. We always start with what do I want someone to feel when I'm done? Like that's
Mhm.
our starting point. In a sales conversation, maybe you want them to feel like I can't live without this, or you want someone to feel like you're competent or funny or kind or honest. And so I always start there. If I go up on a stage or on the radio or on a podcast like this, what do I want people to feel when I'm done? And that's my starting mindset. Uh, I think energy is vastly underrated when it comes to presenting, of making sure you have the right energy level.
Mm.
Most people could double it and be okay. And then beyond that, be present, which is the least helpful piece of advice because it is mastery level stuff. When I do interviews, I'll go and talk on an hour on a stage and I won't prep for it because I would much rather be present. And it sounds like procrastination. It sounds reckless. I give a better presentation when I can just be in the room and do what's pertinent. And that has taken me a long time, but the goal is to be present. is to not go up there like, oh, hey, I brought this from outside the room and now I'm inside the room and I'm going to pour it on you. I want to be inside the room. I want to look around. And then the final one is I figure eight a room in terms of my eyes when I'm presenting so I can get a feel for who my advocates are. And
Mm,
so when I get to a difficult part, especially if I'm being present and I don't know what I'm going to say and I'm searching in my brain, I can use their eyes as an anchor point because they're an advocate for me in that
mhm,
moment. And so I can regain my confidence as I'm figuring out what I'm saying. And then I can go. And so
mhm,
I'll find 3 or 4 anchor points in a room and then use that person's energy to get me through a moment when I'm just searching.
mhm.
And that's crazy helpful. I do it on Zoom too. You can actually see the little boxes. You can see someone leaning forward and sort of laughing. And I might even say, "Oh, Chelsea," and then they pop up
Uh-huh.
and it's
That's
helpful.
so fascinating. I gave a presentation a couple months ago. One of the people in the middle of the room was sleeping.
Yeah, no,
It was
don't look at them.
so distracting.
Yeah, don't look at them.
I was like, I don't think this is that bad. But she, just had a bad day. It's fine. But it was a wild high. I had to work so hard to not see it.
That's tough.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I had a buddy who's a Hall of Fame speaker. His thing he used to say about bigger audiences is if you can swim, who cares how deep the ocean is?
Mhm.
And I love that. It's this idea of like, if you can speak in front of 5 people or 2 people, 3 people that are in this room, then you can speak on a stage of 3,000 people because you know what it is to communicate.
Mhm.
And as I was figuring out that journey, that was really helpful to me. Some people
Mhm.
hear that and are like, "Psh, I wish." No, I'm actually more comfortable on a stage of 2,000 people than I am in a room of 3 people.
That's fascinating. Well, thanks for jumping on and sharing.
Thanks for
This is fun.
choking me up. It's been an emotional week, but thank you.
It's Thursday. You only have one more day.
Oh, Lord. We'll
One more
get through
day.
it.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Scared Confident. Until next time, keep telling fear. You will not decide what happens in my life. I will. If you want to get the inside scoop, sign up for my newsletter. We decided to make content for you instead of social media algorithms. The link is waiting for you in show notes, or you can head over to tiffanysouter.com. Thanks for listening in.